Lots of companies are using container technology to deploy their applications, but their developers are still using the traditional way for local dev environment setup, such as installing framework and dependencies on their local machine. In this session, we're going to introduce Docker Compose, which is used to build a multi-container environment. So the dev team can use this method to set up their local dev environment to align with their production environments. This is part of my Docker tutorial for absolute beginners, which is going to be launched soon. Make sure you subscribe my channel if you are interested in learning Docker from my full course. So what is Docker Compose? Docker Compose is a tool for defining and running multi-container Docker applications. With Docker Compose, you use a YAML file to configure your application services. Then, with a single command, you create and start all the services from your configuration. Compose works in all environments: production, staging, development, testing, as well as CI workflows. It also has commands for managing the whole lifecycle of your application. Start, stop, and rebuild services, view the status of running services, stream the log output of running services, run a one-off command on a service. We have installed Docker Compose plugin in the previous session. If you don't have Docker Compose installed in your machine, you can just follow the link in the description. Just a reminder here, from the end of June 2023, Compose V1 won't be supported anymore, so make sure you switch to Compose V2. We're going to use Docker Compose V2 in our session. Now let's just check our Docker Compose version, which is 2.5. Let's have a look at a simple example for WordPress website. I said it is simple is because in this example, we're not going to build an image. Instead, we're going to use the images from Docker Hub to run the multi-container application. Let's just go to the WordPress page on Docker Hub. So this is the official Docker image for WordPress. So we just scroll down and we can see how to use the image. We need to configure the database related parameters using envs. Keep scrolling down, we can see here shows the Docker Compose file example. This includes WordPress and MyCircleDB container. To build our first app, we can just copy this. Then back to VS Code and we create a file which is called dockercompose.yaml and paste the code in. Then we run Docker Compose up. You might see no matching manifest error if you are using MacBook with M1 or M2 chip. When you run Docker Compose up, it is due to MyCircle 5.7 does not support ARM64 chip. The simplest way is to update MyCircle image to 8.0, which solves the problem. Then we run Docker Compose up again. Because the port mapping we did is 8080 to port 80, so now we go to HTTP localhost 8080. See, the website is up. Back to VS Code, if you want to stop the containers, you can just use Ctrl+C. Then we do docker ps no running containers, then docker ps-a. These two containers stopped. If you want to run the containers in the background, you can use dflag, which means quiet. So we do docker compose up-d. Then docker ps, we can see these two containers are up. And we can also check the container via Docker Desktop. See, the two containers are here. If you want to log into the container, just simply click here and it pops up a terminal. I actually like to use bash. We can list the content in the folder and we can see all WordPress files here. Now we can just close the terminal. Let's have a look at the docker compose.yaml file for some details. Docker compose file is like a complex Docker run commands. It actually defines the parameters needed for running multiple containers. For example, the WordPress container. We have WordPress, which is the container name set within services. Within WordPress, we have the image, which is for the image name. When you run Docker Compose up, it will pull the image from local repository. But if the image does not exist, it will pull the image from Docker Hub. Restart policy is used to help us take care of a particular situation with the containers. There are 4 policies can be used. So no means never attempt to restart a container even if it crashes or stopped. Always means if a container stops for any reason whatever, always attempt to restart it. On failure means only attempt to restart the container if it failed because of an error code. Unless stopped means always restart the container unless we stop it explicitly. Here we use always restart policy. Port is used for port mapping, and we have explained it in the previous session. We're going to use port 8080 of our host machine to map the port 80 for the container. In the environment block, we define the environment variables which are required to connect to the database. If you look at the DB container below, you can see the environment variables for the database have already been set. Then, how to set the environment variables for the container? It depends on how the image is built. For the public image on the Docker Hub, you can just check the document to understand more. For example, let's go to MyCircle Docker Hub page. Scroll down. You can see in the environment variables section what environment variables you need to set, such as database, username, and password, etc. The next one is volume. A Docker volume is an independent file system entirely managed by Docker and exists as a normal file or directory on the host, where data is persisted. In this example for the database, you can see we have created a local volume which is called db to map the volume of the container /var/lib/mycircle, which is used to store the databases and tables. Even if we shut down the container, as long as the data volume exists, we still have the data persistent. For WordPress in this example, we created a data volume as well, but actually volume in Docker Compose can also be used to do a volume mapping from local directory to container directory. Here we change the volume part in WordPress container with a local directory, var // and remove the WordPress volume in the volume pod, and a var // folder is created with WordPress content. We can check if the volume of the host is mapped to the volume of the container. Let's create a file in the var // folder which is called test.log. Then we run docker execute -it container ID and bash. Now we are in the container. Let's list the folder, and now we can see test.log file is here, which is what we expected, right? By this method, the developers can code locally, and the change will be reflected immediately. In the next session, we'll do some more discovery on how to use Docker Compose.yaml. Now let's move on to the next session about some more configurations for Docker Compose. In this session, we'll use Docker Compose to understand the environment based on the Docker file we created. So first, we create a folder and a Docker file in it. We will reuse the example in the previous session so we can type from WordPress. This time, we would like to use a specific tag of a WordPress as our base image. Let's go back to Docker Hub WordPress page and click tags. This time, we want an image with PHP 8.1 with Apache, so we just search 8.1. So we scroll down and we can see this 6.1.1 PHP 8.1 Apache. Let's just use this and copy and paste it to our Docker file. Back to the Docker Compose file. Here we need to use build. Let's go to Compose file build reference page and scroll down to the build definition. So here we can see build has two options. One is context, which is required. It defines either a path to a directory containing a Docker file or a URL to a Git repository. The other one is the Docker file location, especially when you want to have a Docker file with customized name. Now, let's add built-in context. We just use dot as the root path. Docker file, we use dot/Docker file. We actually don't have to configure Docker file as the Docker file is in the context directory. Once the build is here, The name value for the image flag will be used as the image name, which is built locally. Let's run the Docker compose up-d. You need to wait a few seconds. Docker PS. Now all the services are up and running. We scroll up to the build process and we can see the image is built based on the Docker file we set, and the WordPress image tag is what we set as well. Then I want to installing something via Docker file. Let's first jump into the container. Docker execute -it bash. Now we are in. So I just want to use editor nano to update wp-config.php for troubleshooting purpose. But I found nano is not installed. Now we go back to the Docker file and add run apt updates and apt install nano-y. Then we run docker compose up again, but this time we need build flag with 2 dashes as the Docker file is updated. Build flag means the image needs to be rebuilt. You can see the build process is happening again. Docker PS, the 2 containers are up. Let's log into the container and run nano wp-config.php. It works, which means nano is installed. The next thing we can do is to control the container startup order. We use depends on, which expresses startup and shutdown dependencies between services. In this example, we want WordPress container starts after the database is up and healthy. First, we can create a depends on in WordPress container definition. If we just use this short syntax, which means DB container is created before WordPress container, then we want to do WordPress container can only start when DB container is healthy. We need to add conditions, which is service healthy. And then we also need to define the health check method for the DB container. For test, we use mycircleadmin ping command. In order to let you see the difference, I will set interval with 5 seconds. Then timeout 5 seconds. Retry 5 times. Then let's run docker compose up. This time we don't need build flag as the image does not need to be rebuilt. Now you can see the DB container status recreated and then waiting. The WordPress container is stuck at the recreated status. When the DB is healthy, then the WordPress one is up immediately until it is healthy, and then the WordPress container is up. Docker PS, the DB status is healthy, right? Now we scroll up. Here we can see Docker Compose helps us create a network, but now I want to customize the network we created. It's quite useful when you build a multi-tier application using Docker Compose. So first, we create a network called WP Network Default, and then we need to add the network into the WordPress definition. And then same in the DB definition as well. Once it is done, let's run Docker Compose up again. So now we can see another network is created. Docker PS, all containers are up. In Docker network list, we can see the old one is here, and this is the new network we created. Now let's go back to the browser and still use localhost 8080. Yep, the site is working. Okay, that's all for this session. Regarding the Docker networking, I'm going to explain more in the next session. I want to make it clear that this video does not cover every aspect for Docker Compose, but it should give you a great starting point. Thank you very much for watching. If you find it helpful, please give me a thumb up. And also, if you want to see the full Docker course, please make sure you subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video.